I take my conical shape and I push it flat, and now the loop that the shoulder girdle represents is bigger. It's bigger in circumference than the cone that they used to rest on, so it slides down.
Good morning. Happy Tuesday. I have Neuro Coffee in hand, and it is perfect. Okay. Kind of a busy Tuesday. So we're going to dig right into today's Q&A. It's kind of a two for Tuesday. I'm going to show two segments. The first segment is actually from last week's Coffee and Coaches conference call. We got to talking about the depressed scapula representation, what it means, how it arises, what are the influences, how does this influence other activities. And I made reference to a video that I did, I can't remember, sometime last year in regards to this, and we provided some solutions there. So we're gonna break it down in the first segment, talk about it a little bit, and then move into the solutions segment as well. So I think you'll find this useful. If you would like to participate in a 15-minute consultation with yours truly, go to askbillhartman@gmail.com, askbillhartman@gmail.com, put 15-minute consultation in the subject line so we don't delete it, and we'll arrange that at our mutual convenience. Everybody have an outstanding Tuesday, and I will see you tomorrow.
Hey, Bill, I have another shoulder question. So in IFAST University, we were talking about protraction and retraction.
Yes, sir.
If you protract or retract, it creates that elevation.
Yes, sir.
Shoulder.
Yes, sir.
And then John asked a question in the forum about, so what happens when you have like depression, like your shoulder hanging down?
Yeah.
And I watched the video that you posted, and you said it's lower, posterior lower compression that causes that.
No.
Or
No. Okay.
I misunderstood it, so I wanted to see
momentum.
That.
Okay. All right. So here's the picture that I want you to make in your head. All right. You're going to make a loop starting at your manubrium, clavicle, acromion, scapula, dorsal rostral, scapula, acromion, clavicle. So it's a cross section of an icosahedron is actually what it is on top of your thorax, right? That's your shoulder girdle. It rests on top of the axial skeleton. You got it? So it's a loop that sits on top.
Yeah.
The thing that holds that up, okay, is its circumference resting on whatever shape the rib cage is underneath. Okay, you follow me so far? Okay, as long as the rib cage is conical, okay, so it's shaped like a cone, the shoulder girdle will only fall down so far. If I squeeze the hoop tighter, it goes up the cone. Make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But what if I squeeze the cone flat and it's no longer conical? It's just like really, really smushed front to back. And I got this loop that sits on it, and the loop goes, whoomp, it falls down because there's nothing to hold it up anymore. Okay.
When you elevate, aren't you already squeezing from front to back? And that's what.
Yes, but keep squeezing.
Like
Squeeze all the air out of the thorax, like all of it. Lower. So this is an end game representation under most circumstances. Right? Yeah. So I am compressed Jen just had a light bulb moment. So this is compression all day, every day, everywhere. So I take my conical shape and I push it flat, and now the loop that the shoulder girdle represents is bigger. It's bigger in circumference than the cone that they used to rest on, so it slides down, okay? But it's got attachments right here at the SC joint. So this is like every SC joint problem known to man is either going to be a extreme depressed or an extreme elevated position, okay? Because you get pressure here under both circumstances. But the shoulders drop because there's literally nothing to hold it up. short of continuous muscle activity, which is really hard to do. And you pay the price for that because you end up with like suboccipital headaches. You end up with like really like upper cervical stuff. These are the people that, you know, they learn too much anatomy on the internet and they go, yeah, my levator scapulae is tight, stuff like that, right? And it almost looks like the acromion are sitting lower than the SC joint when you look at them from the front, and then they've got the Shirley Simon would call it like downward scapula syndrome or downward something syndrome, right? But that's typically what's going on. So you get the protraction retraction element of it where you're trying to elevate, but literally it's like at some point in time, if they keep compressing, they don't have the air underneath the shoulder girdle to hold it up at all. So some people will still walk in with this kind of a representation because they can maintain the muscle activity. Some people just can't do it. They don't have enough pressure to hold the position. That's why everybody doesn't have depressed shoulders, and some people have elevated and some people don't. So the mechanics just allow it to one of the other to maintain. And Manuel, you're going to run into this a lot just because of the degree of pulling that you do with your Olympic lifters.
Well, I see it a lot with front squatting as well. Like if they don't have a good rack position, they're always hanging out like this, trying to get ready to.
Right. So the solution is not to say, hey, put your shoulders down. The solution is create the AP expansion.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't have to tell them to put their shoulders down because they don't have a choice right now, right? And so yeah, you got to drive the AP so that shoulder girdle has a place to rest on. Then they have a rack position, right? Because think about this. What do you rest in in a front squat? What do you rest in the barbell
on? The clavicle, and then it's over the groove of your deltoid. It's on bone.
What's it actually resting on, Manuel? You're stacking weight on a column of air, right? If that air is the wrong shape, all right? So wrong shape. How many people are great front squatters with a vertical sternum? They drop the weight forward, right? Their elbows drop. They can't hold the weight up. They got a lousy rack position. They have to try to elevate their scaps using muscles. It's not going to go well.
Yeah, you need it up.
So exactly. So I have to have the AP expansion to create the right shape underneath the load, right? So if I can rest the bar on a column of compressed air that will not compress further, now I am super strong because I don't have to try to use all this muscle activity to hold the weight up and try to lift it at the same time. But the way you'll see this, or you'll even feel it yourself, just take a reasonably heavy front squat weight and then take it to your max effort, like to the last possible rep. And then you'll see how hard it is to hold your sternum up, right? Because the weight is going to win eventually. And then that's when you start to dump the weight forward because you can no longer maintain the position to hold the column of air in the right place. So we're always creating this column of fluid underneath the load under every circumstance, whether you're talking about an overhead press or a front squat or a back squat or whatever. That's why the shape is so important as far as the execution is concerned, because it's, number one, it's going to hold the weight up. Number two, it's going to allow you to access positions that you might need to actually squat or bend or whatever you're going to do.
Hmm. So you said it's an end game strategy. So that's, I guess,
they're very compressed. Did you see the picture they put in that video?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Yeah. That was pretty, there is just FYI for anybody that's concerned with the depressed shoulder thing. There's a video on my YouTube channel. Just go to the search and put in depressed.
And this comes from Greg. And Greg has a question about shoulder girdle depression. In this case, Greg says the impairment is a lack of elevation with arm elevation and at rest. So he's talking about like a depressed shoulder girdle. that is resting a little bit lower than we would perceive as normal. He says, I've seen this presentation most in my narrow ISA individuals, including my weightlifters and ballerinas. While I can see the utility of achieving an adequate amount of scapular elevation while reaching overhead, I also appreciate that this will compress the dorsal rostral thorax. So, Greg, you're on point with that perspective. So far, so good. I can also appreciate that under some circumstances it may be useful to compress the dorsal rostral thorax during this phase of arm elevation. However, in my narrows, who show deficits of external rotation, internal rotation, and lower cervical rotation, so it's a lot of compressive strategy, Greg, I can see how this would be in conflict with the restoration of movement. One of the common recommendations is passive elevation of the shoulder girdle at rest and then active maintenance. Although this might reduce the depressive aspect, it could also be considered promoting an additional layer of superficial compressive strategy. And so he's talking about raising the arm to about 120 degrees and then working on like a shrugging motion. So do you have any thoughts as to when or if this strategy might be useful? Okay, Greg, I do have some thoughts on this. The first thing that we want to do is we want to identify what we're really looking at. So the person that you mentioned in your email, well, I left their name out, describes this depressed shoulder girdle in a very, very specific way in regards to certain types of muscle activity. So they use terminology of shortness and length and relative flexibilities and things like that. And so they describe this as having shortness of pectoralis major and minor, shortness of the lats, shortness of supraspinatus, which I really love. It's a great observation by this person, because I think that the concentric orientation of the supraspinatus in this circumstance is one of the reasons why you see so much supraspinatus tendinopathy. The concentric orientation reduces blood flow to that supraspinatus tendon, and we get degeneration there. So that's kind of a big deal. But if you look at all this compressive strategy, essentially what we're looking at is your end game narrow presentation, which is hopefully, based on my technology, I should be able to present you with that right there. Okay, so this is kind of what we're looking at. So if you squeezed all the air out of the thorax, essentially there's nothing to elevate the shoulder girdle, and so that's why you're going to start to see this depressed appearance where the lateral aspect of the clavicle may actually look like it's resting lower than the medial aspect. You're going to look like you have these really, really stretched out upper trapezius, and they are not relaxed under any circumstance, and so we do have this upper dorsal rostral compression. So I think you're dead on that if we were to try to influence this with, one, I have to move my arm into a position where I probably have to utilize a compensatory strategy to even get there, and number two, I'm going to use muscle activity that's going to further compress this area. I think that maybe over time, if you're really diligent, you might get some change, and we'll talk about that here in just a second. But I think that you're just driving people deeper and deeper into a compressive strategy, because what you're going to end up doing is you're going to end up compressing our little Camporini angle right here between the clavicle and the scapula. So that's going to get narrower and narrower. And so then we just get this, while it might look like you're starting to elevate the scapula and reducing the depressed look, if you will, you're also going to create a lot of compression in that upper DR. And so now we've just sacrificed all your lower cervical rotation. You're not going to hit your end range flexion. You're going to use a compensatory strategy there. And so again, I don't like to go there first, because I think it's just it's a much harder road to follow. One of the things that a lot of people tend to jump to too soon under this circumstance is they try to do some form of inverted activity. This also requires that I have the requisite shoulder elevation or flexion, if you will, to get into that position. And oftentimes I have too much of a compressive strategy in the dorsal rostral area or upper part of the thorax, and so that's why they tend to fail when they jump to this too soon. So what I would do, Greg, is I would probably start thinking about trying to get the posterior lower expansion first. And so there's any number of ways that we can approach this. Side lying activities, rolling patterns are a really nice place to start, because we can take advantage of this gravitational effect of the internal organs shifting around and actually allowing us to gain some of this anterior expansion. We also have some activities that emphasize the posterior expansion with the arms in this non-compensatory position, well below 90 degrees. You can find those on YouTube. They're going to indicate like posterior lower expansion, dorsal rostral expansion. So check those out. Once we do those activities, we can usually pick up about 90 degrees of shoulder flexion, and now we've got a lot of stuff on the table. Now we can go quadruped, we can do band and cable reaching, and try to gain a little bit more of the anterior expansion, so we can pick up the pump handle under those circumstances and maintain that posterior lower strategy. Because when we're working at that 90 degrees of shoulder elevation, we do have dorsal rostral concentric muscle activity, and so by creating a little bit of concentric orientation there, we promote expansion of the posterior lower, and we're going to drive airflow up and anterior to lift up that pump handle. So again, once we get 90 degrees of shoulder flexion, we got a lot of stuff on the table that we can use. Once we can get them through this middle range, this IR dominant range of the shoulder, we've got good pump handle, we can get about 120 degrees of shoulder flexion. Now we can start to talk about the activities that you were mentioning before. However, I would caution against trying to use the shrugging activity again, because all we're going to do is create a compressive strategy there. But this is where we would start to use some inverted positions, because we have access to the non-compensatory shoulder flexion that's available to us. We've got deep squat, pull down activities, we've got bar hang activities and things like that we can utilize that are going to promote a lot of that remainder of the anterior posterior expansion. We're going to drive some of that end range shoulder flexion, so we're going to get the upper DR expansion, and so I would use your shoulder flexion measure and go to the YouTube video and check out how I measure shoulder flexion. It's very, very important that you measure it a very specific way, so you know that you're getting shoulder flexion and you're not getting a compensatory presentation at the end range of flexion. So Greg, thank you so much for the question.